Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest major record labels. Ooh, major record labels. We're talking about the traditional majors, and we'll get to that in a minute. I did a talk, a couple of years ago about sort of the classical music recording industry, the shape of it, and who all the players were. But I think it's a good time to revisit that because, well, I was going through all the comments because I read all the comments and delete a lot of the comments. But someone had complained that, we do lists every day. Well, we have been doing a list every day because this particular series of lists has just been so much fun. And it allows everybody to participate. And somebody very kindly pointed out that since I do 3 videos a day, the majority of what I do is not a list. So if someone has a problem with the list, try looking at the other content, right? The whining and the complaining. I mean, I listen to it and I care about it. I really do. But it has to have a basis that's kind of like fair, And when the minority of what I'm doing is the thing that the person doesn't like, it's hard to have much sympathy. So let's just set that aside for a moment. The reason these lists have been so fascinating, I think, is because through your participation, we really are surveying the world of recorded music, which is what this channel is for. Basically, classical music generally, the world of recorded music specifically. And you're doing an awfully good job at it. You guys are great. And you know a lot of stuff that I don't know. And you remind me of things I might have known or should know. And it's a good refresher for all of us, I think. But beyond that, the reason I want to talk about the major record labels, and there are going to be a couple of these record label things. So don't panic. Don't anticipate. Don't worry. The reason I wanted to do this is because we just did remember the most deserving conductors of major label support and the least deserving conductors of major label support. And when you total all of the lists that you folks have come up with in addition to my own, you realize what a staggering, unbelievable legacy we have. Think about it for a minute. Classical music is like 2% of the market for recorded music or less. It's just horrible. And supposedly nobody pays attention to it. And to hear certain actors and people talking about ballet and opera, nobody cares about any of it. And yet, if you look at what these major labels did, the sheer amount of time and energy and money and resources and the quantity of product that they produced, the number of really superb artists, all of whom were captured. Some of you have said, you should do the least deserving artists who didn't, the most deserving artists who didn't get support from major labels. Well, how would we know that they were most deserving unless they got support from major labels? Fact is, you wanted more, but you can't say they didn't have a chance to do their stuff. Most of them did, nonetheless. So you're talking about major artists who did tons of stuff and minor artists who did less stuff, but the total sum universe of recorded music that the major labels produced was almost beyond comprehension. It's amazing. And it's not just, Beethoven symphonies or, the things that in Meine kleine Nachtmusik or the things everybody listens to every 5 minutes, Nessun Dorma. It's tons and tons and tons of music that nobody ever heard of, that couldn't possibly have been profitable. And yet they did it. They did it, and they did it, for the most part, really, really well. For all of our bitching and complaining and whining and moaning about how crazy the industry is. Now, they may have done it by accident. They may not have been all that intentional in the way that they did it. They may have done it for the wrong reasons. All of that's in the mix. Of course it's in the mix. They may have done the right thing the wrong way. We know that. We talk about that ceaselessly. But the fact is they did it. The evidence is there. It's the raw material is there, and it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Can you possibly look at the lists we've been doing in the past couple of weeks and not think that we are the beneficiaries of the most amazing amazing corporate largesse in like the history of business. This little tiny population of music lovers has been gifted this staggering legacy of recorded music. So that's really, really amazing. And I want to make that point. I think it's important because although it's fun to bitch and moan and whine and fetch and all of that stuff, we are really, really in good shape in terms of the quality and quantity of recorded music. And this is largely due, or it was largely due, let's put it that way, up until a few decades ago, to just a handful of major labels who had all the major artists signed to them and who embarked on recording programs that were really ambitious and successful. I mean, let's face it, they were successful. So here are the 5 major labels. And unlike the other lists here, I'm really not interested in any additions or subtractions because this is who they are. I'm going to be dogmatic about it. There is no room for additions or subtractions. If you feel like doing that, do it on your own time. I'm deleting any comments that propose to alter this list. And I hope that when I explain these things, you'll understand why. Because first of all, we're going to have some other lists coming up of labels that will have things you probably care about. But we're not covering the whole industry. It's not the point. The point is to address a historical fact. And this is the historical fact. First, Decca. Decca had, well, I mean, who did they have? They had lots of major artists. They had Schulte. Didn't like him so much, but they had him. But they also had Karajan for operas. And they had, Macaris doing Janacek. Yay! They had Dorati doing all the Haydn symphony. They had symphonies. They had Kertész doing the complete Dvorak cycle. When the only way you could get around them was in Eastern, around East. The only other place you could find these things was in Eastern Europe, if you were lucky. It's an extraordinary label. They had fabulous pianists. They did everything, right? It was a major label. They did the Ring, the Schulte Ring. For a long time, Decca was the opera label, par excellence, for a long, long time. And it's an incredible catalog full of incredible stuff. Now, because they are part of Universal now, and they have absorbed Philips, we have to include Philips with Decca, I think. Philips could be done separately, but you have to remember that for most of its life, Philips, which you might want to include as one of the triumvirate of, Universal labels, Philips was a local Dutch label, and they had a tremendous base on which to build. They had Dutch artists like Ellie Ameling. They had the Concertgebouw. They had Bernard Haitink. And from that base, then they snagged Neville Mariner in the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. And the Mozart edition came out. And so Philips became a major player, especially as they started to follow their artists out into the wider world. But really until the 1970s, maybe even, the classical music universe was still fairly localized. I mean, I used to go to the MIDEM convention when I ran the Cannes Classical Awards in the 1990s. And even then, the purpose of this convention, MIDEM stands for Marché International du Disque et Édition Musicale. It was the big international shindig where all the music publishers and labels got along. People were looking for international distribution. I mean, international distribution of classical music was still sort of a newish thing. There were a lot of local players, a lot of smaller players, and the major labels, were major because they had international distribution, and they were able to do that. So Decca / Philips is one of these players, and definitely a major label. I mean, Philips had Alfred Brendel and Claudio Arrau. Decca had Vladimir Ashkenazy, and we could make lists, right? Who these artists were, and it was an extraordinary legacy. Next, we have RCA. Now, RCA, BMG, RCA, ceased to be a major player when they got sucked up by BMG and by Bertelsmann's and then merged with Sony and all of that stuff. But in the 40s and 50s and 60s, I mean, RCA was the big player, probably the biggest in the world, because they had Arthur Rubinstein, they had Vladimir Horowitz. Well, they got him eventually, but they had Arthur Rubinstein. Let's stay there. They had Toscanini, and they had a fabulous program of opera recordings, including artists like Leontine Price and Placido Domingo, who was just starting his career, and really, really fantastic stuff. They had Munch and the Boston Symphony. They had Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. They had incredible stuff, but that was largely based in the United States. There were licensing arrangements between various labels. Decca stuff came out on RCA, some of it RCA, some EMI stuff did. They interchanged, and they shared artists on certain occasions, especially for larger productions like operas and things like that. But RCA had an unbelievable legacy, especially when they hit stereo, the living stereo productions and whatnot. So, they were one of the labels that sort of had the world of classical music sewn up in a nice little bow. Their last great artist relationship probably was Leonard Slatkin. When he was given the opportunity in St. Louis to basically record anything he wanted, and he did a lot of American and unusual repertoire, and they went along with it, and that was great. And they had Michael Tilson Thomas in San Francisco, but that ended, and San Francisco, of course, started its own label. So that was like the end of the major label dominance as far as it goes. And the other great American label, of course, was Columbia. Columbia had Bruno Walter, they had Ormandy in Philly, they had George Sell, they had Leonard Bernstein, they had the Juilliard Quartet, they had, prime artists. They had Glenn Gould. I mean, really, really astonishing. And Rudolph Serkin, and I mean, the names just keep coming. And they're legendary. And these people all made these huge boxes of material that we're still enjoying today. They had Robert Kraft doing Schoenberg. They had Pierre Boulez doing Schoenberg. They had Stravinsky doing Stravinsky. They took risks. You might say that it wasn't as great as it is today. I mean, the orchestral playing may not have been as good. Some of the soloists are more comfortable in chamber music. All of those things may be true. But what they did was pretty astounding. Really, really amazing. And the more you delve into these boxes that they're issuing, the more you see what they did. Because a lot of it we've forgotten about. A lot of it was deleted. It hadn't been in print. But when they remaster and issue these things, and you realize that there's, 400 discs of something and there's lots more that they haven't released yet. It's pretty impressive. Absolutely amazing. So after RCA and Columbia, we go back to the UK for EMI HMV. Yes, the great British label, his master's voice, with, the barking dog thing, which RCA also had. They shared the trademark, I think. But Walter Legg, the great producers that these people had. I mean, there were so many of them, but EMI had Karajan initially, at least initially, and the Philharmonia, Klemperer, and Adrian Bolt, and all of the British stuff, and really Barbaroli, and I don't know. You lose track of all the names. There are just so many of them. I mean, really, really astounding. So EMI HMV, of course, was a mega company, a huge, huge, huge company with an endless roster of artists, English and not English, but focused on the English market. Remember, they had Giulini initially, which was really something. A fabulous legacy of stuff. I'm staring at these boxes, and I just I've got walls and walls of boxes over there. And it really is unbelievable how much they did. And not in a very long amount of time. Think about it. Most of this activity, when we're talking about the major labels, if we're not talking about the mono era, but the stereo era, took place between the mid-1950s and the 1980s, say. It really sort of ended around the 1980s when when, they redid everything on CD and everything digitally, everything on compact disc and all that stuff, and then they all just collapsed in the 90s. So you're talking about 35 years worth of work, in which 40 years in which these labels recorded an unbelievable amount of repertoire with a huge amount of artists and singers and conductors and soloists, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, thinking about it in toto. And last but not least, Deutsche Grammophon, of course, in Germany. The great Central European record megalith, which had Karajan, and Karl Böhm and Raphael Kubelik and, Wilhelm Kempf and Emil Gilels and really, really staggering stuff. And tons of it. Eugen Joachim, what an amazing legacy that is. And how depressing it is to look at it now and see that it's all gone down the toilet in terms of how they're handling it. At least they have the box sets, right? Leonard Bernstein they even had eventually. I mean, Columbia had him originally, and Deutsche Grammophon wound up with him to redo almost everything he did for Columbia, and sometimes better and sometimes not as well. It's a story. It really is. Somebody should somehow sit down and write the history of these people, because those were the 5 major labels. It doesn't mean there weren't other big labels around. In Eastern Europe, of course, you had Superphone and Hungariton and Melodia, but they didn't have distribution. You could find their stuff sparingly. And there were other largish labels, too. I mean, there were always independent labels doing things. We're going to talk about some of those in future videos. So let's not jump the gun. Let's stick with these 5. And let's just have a conversation, if I may suggest it, about the good that they did, the amount that they did, the sheer dazzling variety of what they did. It really is amazing. And, when I was seeing the list of deserving conductors and undeserving conductors, I mean, they just kept getting longer and longer and longer, and more names kept coming up. People that I thought of sometimes or didn't think of, or that you thought of. That's why I wanted to do these things. Because between all of us, there's a picture of the musical universe. And it's a picture of the musical universe that is presented in small enough chunks, 5 names, a few more, but, at a time, small enough chunks that people can digest and consider them and go back and take their time and explore. And then that's really, really the whole point of this exercise and all of these lists. And there we've got, I don't know, maybe another 3 or 4 weeks of them to go. And then we're going to do a different program. I know what it is. I'm not telling yet. It's going to be just as much fun. Trust me. It really will. But so first, the 5 greatest major record labels and their achievement. Something to really admire. Somehow it happened. They managed it. It happened. Anyway, I'm babbling now. I just sit here and, look at all this stuff here, and I just go, wow. What fun it is to love classical music. Isn't it great? So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.